Hello! In this video we're gonna be creating texture for those trails. Let me isolate those for you. Okay, so here I've got a single trail that is kind of soft, and then I'm using exactly the same texture and I'm using for the double trail. So that's the double trail and the single soft trail you can see here, and we'll be creating that texture inside of Substance Designer. So let's dive in. So I'm gonna start with Perlin Noise. I'm gonna scale it way down. And next, I'm just gonna run it through cross section. Here, I'm just gonna change this to gradient mirrored so I could get like a nice looking wave pattern. So maybe I'm gonna pick something like this. So we get like a bit more flatter curve here, and then we got like a nice wave there. I want to extract that shape, so I'm going to use a histogram scan. Here, position maybe somewhere in the middle, and then contrast way up. Next, I'm just going to use warp. Let's just distort this shape a little bit. So I'm going to get cells 1. I'm going to use blur just a little bit and run it through warp. For the warp, I'm just going to put 10 to demonstrate it. As you can see, it's way too high in terms of scale of that texture, so I'm just gonna scale it way down. Maybe something like this. And now I'm gonna go back to warp and change its intensity, as I just want a little bit of warp there. So what's gonna happen if I'm just gonna run this texture straight into the warp? You can see we're kind of gonna get a lot of hard angles and hard shapes. This is not what I want. That's why I'm just blurring that texture a little bit. Next, I'm gonna use a multi-directional grayscale. And to this, I'm just gonna copy and paste our Perlin Noise here. But I'm gonna change the scale of it. And for the multi-directional warp grayscale, I'm just going to increase the intensity maybe to 50 and change the directions to 2. Okay, so you can see we're kind of getting a lot of those shapes that actually are on top of each other. So to avoid that, I'm just going to make a little space here and run it through bevel. And before bevel, I'm just gonna blur that shape just a little bit. We can even go with the default settings. As for the bevel, I'm gonna check the distance and go below 1. So I wanna see this nice line in the middle. And once I run this through the multi-directional warp grayscale, you can see we're getting a lot nicer shape with this. Okay, so if you're struggling to get that shape and you're actually getting something like this or even like this, unless you go in for it, I will just use bevel to get a slightly better looking warp. Now we can go back to our histogram scan and just increase our trail. Obviously this is way too high now in terms of value, so we might just go to bevel and check distance and scale it down just to make sure we're getting this nice line in the middle. Okay. As for the frost, whenever I'm working with the frost, I like to have a combinations of very soft shapes and also some hard shapes as well. So for the hard shapes, I'm looking for something that looks like dust. So let's see, we've got dirt 2. That looks to me like a dust. So I'm just gonna run it through blend, plug it here and run it through multiply. So now we're getting that dust only where the trail is. So I'm just going to add this to the trail now. And actually I want this be at the top, so I can control it with opacity. In here I'm just going to add linear, and we're getting a little bit of that dust onto our trail. And now with the opacity slider I can decide how much of that dust I actually want. So I'm going to maybe run with 0.7. I'm going to check in the engine how it looks and if it actually adds anything. If not, we can always come back here and extract it without the dust. So for now, let's just run with this. I'm going to apply a little bit of blur there, maybe 0.1, or let's go with maybe 0.3. I'm going to add some directional warp as well. And for this, I'm going to use crystals 2. But I want the crystals 2 texture to actually follow the direction of our trail. So I'm going to run it through transform to D, rotate it by 90 degrees, blur it, because those shapes are way too hard. I want them to be a bit more blurry, and run it through directional warp. For the values, let's try maybe a 50, 100. We're going to end up with something like this. What you could do, for example, if you don't want to add not sparks, the dust here, you can always run it through another blend here and add this dust there. For example, we could just skip this and add dust here. Okay, so that's the texture for the trail. And as a last note, I'm just gonna bring RGB merge, and what you could do, you could export a couple of variations. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna plug it in because I just need this one texture. However, if you're experimenting with the shapes and you need a bit more variations, I'll just copy this setup, paste it here, plug it into the green channel, copy again, put it in the blue channel, change this this slide in the cross section. Okay, maybe change even the Perlin noise scale. Make sure you're going to end up with a slightly different looking trail than the first one. And once you have variation, you can experiment with the various shapes. Feel free also to play with the different values. So for example, in the histogram scan, just scale it way down. With the bevel, you now probably have to increase it. As you can see, you're kind of getting completely different trail. I'm going to go back to Perlin noise and maybe scale it down a bit. And with the cross section also maybe pick something that looks slightly better. And now under the bevel, I'm just going to tweak this in order to get this very nice soft trail. Right, so I'm going to use this trail. However, feel free to experiment with the different looking trails and make sure you pack 3 here, or just do what I do and just end up with 1. But I'd encourage you to try different shapes, get that texture, and then you can use either R, G, or B channel to pick which trail you actually want in the engine. Okay, so I'm gonna import those textures into the Unreal Engine and into Unity, where we actually gonna explore how to create materials for that trail inside of those 2 engines. Okay, thank you so much for watching.